So with the series coming to a close and the game board being cleared of all other great villains, only two remain, Cersei and Euron Greyjoy. For a series that had had so many wonderfully loathable villains, it feels like all we're left with are the weak sauce duo. If you've seen my video on Cersei, you know why I'm not a huge fan of her portrayal on the show in recent years, and why I don't like her being the final boss. One thing I wish I'd mentioned in that video, and one of the big things that bugs me, is the fact that she's trying to be sold as a sort of anti-hero. You can see it in her new costume, which bears a certain resemblance to another Disney villain turned anti-hero in their attempt to try and create a family-friendly, edgy, hot topic franchise. But I don't think she really deserves that status, when she's not much better than Hodor when it comes towards long-term tactics. Then we have Euron Greyjoy, a man who is all swagger with a great deal of bark but very little bite. A man who's just a nasty, skeevy man, but not much else. But we've seen dozens of nasty, skeevy guys before, and largely they've all been forgotten in comparison to the more iconic villains like Tywin Lannister or Ramsay Snow. The Euron Greyjoy on the show is probably the most boring version we could have gotten, especially compared to what's seen in the books. So join me now as I let you know about what could have been as we dig into the wasted potential of Euron Greyjoy.
You gotta love to be Lobster Magnet. Love is a 10 out, don't you grab it.
So Euron in the books is an interesting enigma. His story isn't complete, but George R.R. Martin has put in some very interesting and intriguing nuggets to grab the audience's attention about how this guy could be the greatest threat seen in the series so far. He's one of Balon Greyjoy's many brothers who haven't been seen in the TV show, but out of all the Greyjoys, who are mostly nasty Viking men, he's got something a little different going for him. You see, Euron has traveled the world on his ship, the Silence, where he raids and pillages whatever he pleases. His crew consists of a bunch of mutes who can't speak because he cut out their tongues. He claims to have been to the smoking ruins of Valyria, the ancient dragon capital which the Targaryens hailed from before it was destroyed during the Great Cataclysm. From there he gained many spoils, including a mysterious horn which supposedly has the power to bind dragons. With it, he intends to use it to force Daenerys to submit to him and become his bride as he takes the Iron Throne for himself. And it's been heavily implied through prophecy that he might be the greatest danger lurking for Daenerys, even greater than the Lannisters or the slavers of Essos. That's what makes him interesting, but what makes him terrifying is that he has a deeper madness that goes far beyond what we've seen from other characters in the show or the books. Other villains like Tywin or the Boltons are still bound by the laws and customs of Westeros. Whether it's religious traditions or the laws of the land, their hands are shackled to a degree, in terms of how bad they can truly be. For example, Roose Bolton considered killing Ramsay when he was a baby to cover up the murder and rape that led to him being born in the first place. But he sees his eyes in him and decides against it because killing your own family and being labeled a kinslayer is one of the greatest taboos in Westeros. So even one of the most vile characters in Game of Thrones is a monochrome of decency he abides by. But Euron doesn't have any of that. He spits in the face of both gods and men. Nothing is sacred to him. There is no tradition that he holds dear. There are no limits he won't cross. Not even the bonds of his own flesh are something he holds as sacred, given how much of his crew consists of his bastard sons who've had their tongues ripped out by Euron himself. The best way to share with you what makes him so interesting in the books is to share a little excerpt from a chapter in the upcoming Winds of Winter book. So if you don't want to see or hear any spoilers, here's your warning for a book you may never get to read. So you got your spoiler warning right now, but I will say this, that this excerpt is more of a mood piece and doesn't ruin any major plot details, but I do think this scene does a great job of characterizing what makes Euron so terrifying and compelling. So before we begin, first a bit of setup. This chapter takes place from the point of view of Euron's brother, Aeron Damphair, who is a high priest of the Drowned Man, the main religion of the Ironborn people of the Iron Island. Euron became king during the King's Moot, and Aeron refuses to let the godless man sit on the Sea Stone throne. He sees to rally his priests and seek the aid of his brother Victorian Greyjoy, but Euron has other plans for him.
Aeron Damphair had struggled back to shore, full of fierce resolve. He would bring down Euron, not with sword or axe, but with the power of his faith. Padding lightly across the stones, his hair plastered black and dank across his brow and cheeks. He stopped for a moment to push it back out of his eyes. and that was where they took him. The mutes who had been watching him, waiting for him, stalking him through strand and spray. A hand clapped down across his mouth, and something hard cracked against the back of his skull. The next time he had opened his eyes, the damp hair found himself fettered in the darkness. Then came the silence. Then came the fever and the taste of blood in his mouth as he twisted in the chains, deep in the bowels of silence. A weaker man might have wept, but Euron Damphair prayed, waking, sleeping. Even in his fever dreams, he prayed. My God is testing me. I must be strong. I must be true. Once in the dungeon before this one, a woman brought his food in place of Euron's mute. A young thing, buxom and pretty. She dressed in the finery of a Greenland lady. In the lantern light, she was the loveliest thing Euron had ever seen. "Woman," he said, "I am a man of God. I command you, set me free."
"Oh, I couldn't do that," she said. "I have food for you, porridge and honey."
She sat beside him on a stool and spooned it into his mouth for him. "What is this place?" he asked between spoonfuls.
"My lord father's castle on Oakenshield."
"The Shield Islands, 1,000 leagues from home. And who are you, child?"
"Thalia Flowers, Lord Hewitt's natural daughter. I am to be King Euron's salt wife. You and I will be kin then."
Euron Damphair raised his eyes to hers. His scabbed lips were crusted with wet porridge. "Woman!" His chains clinked when he moved. "Run! He will hurt you! He will kill you!"
She laughed. "Silly. He won't. I'm his love, his lady. He gives me gifts, so many gifts. Silks and furs and jewels, rags and rocks, he calls them."
The Crow's Eye puts no value in such things. That was one of the things that drew men to his service. Most captains kept the lion's share of their plunder, but Euron took almost nothing for himself.
"He gives me any gown I want."
The girl was prattling happily.
"My sisters used to make me wait on them at table, but Euron made them serve the whole hall naked. Why should he do that, except for love of me?"
She put a hand on her belly and smoothed down the fabric of her gown.
"I'm going to give him sons. So many sons."
"He has sons."
"Base-born boys and mongrels," Euron says. "My sons will come before them. He has sworn by your own drowned god."
Euron would have wept for her. Tears of blood, he thought. But no deliverance came. Only the mutes, to undo his chains and drag him roughly up a long stone stair to where the silence flooded on a cold black sea. A few days later, as her hull shuddered in the grip of some storm, the Crow's Eye came below again, lantern in hand. This time, his other hand held a dagger. "Still praying, priest? Your god has forsaken you." "You're wrong. It was me who taught you how to pray, little brother. Have you forgotten? I would visit your bedchamber at night when I had too much to drink. You shared a room with Euron, high up in the sea tower. I could hear you praying from outside the door. I always wondered, were you praying that I would choose you, or that I would pass you by?" Euron pressed the knife to Aeron's throat. "Pray to me. Beg me to end your torment, and I will." "Not even you would dare," said the Damphair. "I am your brother. No man is more accursed than the Kinslayer, and yet I wear a crown and you rot in chains. How is it that your drowned god allows that when I have killed 3 brothers? Aaron could only gape at him. 3? Well, if you count half-brothers, do you remember little Robin? Wretched creature. Do you remember that big head of his? How soft it was. All he could do was mule and shit. He was my second. Harlan was my first. All I had to do was pinch his nose shut. The grayscale had turned his mouth to stone, so he could not cry out. But his eyes grew frantic as he died. They begged me. When the life went out of them, I went out and pissed into the sea, waiting for the god to strike me down. None did. Oh, and Balin was the third, but you knew that. I could not do the deed myself, but it was my hand that pushed him off the bridge. The crow's eye pressed the dagger in a little deeper, and Aaron felt blood trickling down his neck. If your drowned god did not smite me for killing 3 brothers, why should he bestir himself for the 4th? Because you are a priest? He stepped back and sheathed his dagger. No, I'll not kill you tonight. A holy man with holy blood. I may have need of that blood later. For now, you are condemned to live. And so, Aaron Damphair returned to the Salt Sea. A dozen longships were drawn up at the wharf below. The castle, and twice as many beached along the strand. Familiar banners streamed from their masts. The Greyjoy Kraken, the Bloody Moon of Winch, the war horn of the Good Brothers. But from their sterns flew a flag the priest had never seen before. A red eye with a black pupil beneath an iron crown supported by 2 crows. Beyond them, a host of merchant ships floated on a tranquil turquoise sea. Cogs, carracks, fishing boats, even a great cog, a swollen sow of a ship as big as the Leviathan. Prizes of war, the Damphair knew. Euron Crow's Eye stood upon the deck of Silence, clad in a suit of black scale armor like nothing Aaron had ever seen before. Dark as smoke it was, but Euron wore it as easily as if it was the thinnest silk. The scales were edged in red gold and gleamed and shimmered when they moved. Patterns could be seen within the metal, whorls and glyphs and arcane symbols folded into the steel. Valyrian steel. The Damphair knew. His armor is Valyrian steel. In all the 7 kingdoms, no man owned a suit of Valyrian steel. Such things had been known 400 years ago, in the days before the Doom, but even then, they would have cost a kingdom. Euron did not lie. He had been to Valyria. No wonder he was mad. Your Grace, said Torwald Browntooth, I have the priests. What do you want done with them? Bind them to the prows, Euron commanded. My brother on the Silence. Take one for yourself. Let them dice for the others. One to the ship. Let them feel the spray, the kiss of the drowned god, wet and salty. This time the mutes did not drag him below. Instead they lashed him to the prow of the Silence. Beside her figurehead, a naked maiden, slim and strong, with outstretched arms and wind-blown hair, but no mouth below her nose. They bound Aaron Damphair tight with strips of leather that would shrink when wet, clad only in his beard and breechclout. The Crow's Eye spoke a command. A black sail was raised, lines were cast off, and the Silence backed away from shore to the slow beat of the oar master's drum. her oars rising and dipping, and rising again, churning the water. Above them, the castle was burning, flames licking from the open windows. When they were well out to sea, Euron returned to him. "Brother," he said, "you look forlorn. I have a gift for you." He beckoned, and 2 of his bastard sons dragged the woman forward and bound her to the prow on the other side of the figurehead. Naked as the mouthless maiden, her smooth belly just beginning to swell with the child she was carrying, her cheeks red with tears. She did not struggle as the boys tightened her bonds. Her hair hung down in front of her face, but Euron knew her all the same. "Follow your flowers," he called. "Have courage, girl. All this will be over soon, and we will feast together in the drowned god's watery halls." The girl raised up her head, but made no answer. She had no tongue to answer with. The damp hair knew. He licked his lips and tasted salt.
That's what makes Euron so terrifying. He spits in both the faces of gods and men and laughs as both fail to strike him down or punish him for his indiscretions. Even the sanctity of his own flesh means nothing to him as he straps a pregnant nude woman bearing his own child to the mast of his ship while charging forth into battle after cutting out her tongue. What makes it all the worse is that he is wearing a full suit of armor made from Valyrian steel, and longtime readers of the book know why that's such a big deal considering how rare Valyrian steel weapons are in the world of Song of Ice and Fire. It shows that there is some truth to his boasts about pillaging the smoking ruins of Valyria. The most terrifying notion behind everything he claims is that he might actually not be lying. There is nothing more terrifying than a madman, but what's even scarier than that is a madman who might actually be right. That there is a method behind his madness, a madness that has achieved results on par with the greatest magical feats seen so far in the series, like Daenerys hatching her dragon eggs. It makes him a terrifying villain, unlike others we've seen before, because even the Boltons and the Lannisters have some measure of decorum. Tywin wanted to throw a baby dwarf Tyrion to the sea, but couldn't due to the taboo against kinslaying, and Roose wanted to kill baby Ramsay, but stayed his blade, lest even he be labeled a kinslayer. But Euron does not give a about anything. His entire ship is run by his bastard children, who have all had their tongues ripped out, and it's this sort of unpredictable madness backed by the real legit magic from the smoking ruins of the most magical city in the world that the Targaryens originally called home is what makes him into a beast unlike anything else we've ever seen before. Despite the numerous depraved and brutally cruel villains who've all become fixtures on the show and in the books, Euron is something else entirely. But sadly, when Euron finally does arrive, he arrives in the most boring fashion possible. He's just another scuzzy, scruffy, douchey bandit man, a bandit man with magical teleportation sailing ships, but still a bandit man whose only goal is to shtup the queen. Gone are his connections to the mythical doomed land of Valyria, as well as the magical horn he found that could supposedly bend dragons to his will. If you were to use a Mad Libs to create a Game of Thrones villain by people who'd only heard of the show through friends but never bothered to watch it themselves, Euron would probably be the end result. And while you could blame this one on the 2 showrunners, since everything that's come after the book material has been far more conventional from a narrative perspective, I also think the blame lies at George R.R. Martin's feet as well. You can come up with the greatest character of all time, Baddie McBadass McBaddington, the most edgy, disturbing villain of all time, but if he doesn't do anything cool, it doesn't matter how much build-up or potential he has, he's just a cool sketch. He needs something to earn his role in the story, and since Cersei is the de facto final villain of the series, she needed some kind of muscle outside of the Necro Mountain. So Euron Greyjoy was brought in the most boring way possible, but maybe that's the truth that even George R.R. Martin doesn't know what to do with the guy, seeing how he's off writing history books about the Targaryen kings, but is absolutely petrified about the prospect of moving things forward in the main series, because maybe he knows deep down inside that he doesn't have another Red Wedding in him, and can't come up with a payoff for Euron after all of his build-up. It's impossible to imagine a way to surprise someone when they're already expecting a surprise, but that anxiety seems to be consuming and eating away at his very soul. George R.R. Martin relieves himself from that pressure by telling historical stories about the Targaryens' past, stories where he can literally reuse huge swaths of previously published material from books like A World of Ice and Fire. It's the perfect tool to scratch that procrastination itch, even though he hasn't really done much of anything to finish the book that everyone wants to read. I'd love to be proven wrong and maybe read The Winds of Winter before I or George R. R. Martin dies and go, oh snap, I can't believe how badass and amazing Euron Greyjoy is. Once he unleashes his full potential, it makes the entire world bend to his madness. But I think he'll always be a half-empty cup, despite how much I wish he'd live up to his overflowing potential. But for all you people out there who haven't read the book and don't have any idea who this guy is anyway, I wanted to at least let you know what you've been missing and see what could have been, assuming the showrunners actually had a finished blueprint to work from. Who knows, years from now, where HBO is desperate for another hit, maybe they'll remake Game of Thrones but more closely follow the rest of the books, assuming they're ever finished. Hope you've all been enjoying a month of Ice and Fire. We got one last video to go along with the final episode of Game of Thrones, so before you get ready for the end to see who claims the Iron Throne, be sure to stop by for another video essay to pregame for the finale. And I'd like to make a special thanks to Wings of Prophecy, who commissioned the next video topic, which will be discussing Game of Thrones and Berserk. But wait, there's someone else out there, in the distance. Why yes, it's Brodor, the Knight of the Seven Turntables, who has pledged his support on Bounty for the upcoming Game of Thrones Berserk video. Thank you, Brodor. You are the hero we deserve and the one we need right now. So as a month of Ice and Fire comes to a close, I ask, which of you shall join Brodor in pledging your support? Send your pledges through Bounty if you'd like to show appreciation for any of the videos I've made this month. And tune in next Sunday for the big finale of a month of Ice and Fire. And a very special thank you to Tim, who did that wonderful dramatic reading of that preview chapter from The Winds of Winter. If you want to give Tim a thank you for his work, check out his channel, Tim and the Bald Sexy, link in the description below. Give Tim a sub. Let's see if we can get him to over 100. That's the best way to thank Tim for his wonderful efforts in that reading. And if you enjoyed it, then he deserves a sub. Go give him a sub. Do it now. Give him a sub. Come on. I know you and the Lobster Legions can at least put it over 100. Let's make that happen. And as always, remember, lobsters and tennis, but don't you grab it.